Mr. Keith.
My lady, the first witness this afternoon is Sam Smith-Higgins, please, who will be attending online. Thank you.
Are you able to hear me clearly?
I am.
Thank you. If you'd like to repeat the affirmation after me, please. I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that
that the evidence I shall give
the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
will be the truth,
the whole truth,
and
nothing but the truth.
nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
We've met before, Sam Higgins, so thank you very much, Smith-Higgins, sorry. So thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon.
Can I please apologise for not being there in person?
Oh, don't be daft.
I find it really disrespectful when people don't appear in person, but my husband is going through cancer treatment, daily cancer treatment, and obviously I have to drive him and what have you, so it was just impossible this time. But I do apologise and thank you for letting me appear remotely.
No apology necessary. I don't consider any kind of disrespect, and I do hope the treatment works.
Thank you. Me too.
Mrs. Smith-Higgins, could I start, please, with some of the formalities? Could you give the inquiry your full name, please?
Sam Smith-Higgins.
Thank you very much. You've kindly provided a witness statement dated the 7th of February 2024, which you've signed. It contains, as is absolutely usual, a statement of truth, declaring to the truth of the facts in your statement. And the reason why you've provided that statement and why you're giving evidence today is that you're one of the co-leaders of COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice, Cymru.
That's correct.
Together with Anna Louise Marsh-Rees, whom we had the pleasure of hearing in I think, modules 1 and 2 and 3.
That's correct.
Your group, Mrs. Smith-Higgins, COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice, Cymru, originated, I think, as an autonomous group. It separated from the UK group in July 2021. And it's dedicated itself to campaigning for and giving a voice to those bereaved by COVID-19 in Wales. Is that right?
Right.
I think you're the most prominent organisation in Wales involved in the discourse, as you describe it, surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic.
We certainly are.
And could you just say something briefly, please, about your primary aims? You've referred in your witness statement to the fact that there is an urgent and burning and utterly understandable need to understand why decisions were made as they were, and for errors to be acknowledged, recognised and learnt from. Is that a fair summary of the primary aim of your group?
It is, and also to get change. You know, at the moment, COVID and flu are still rampant throughout healthcare settings in Wales. We desperately need change there. We have made change for bereavement services in Wales already. So yeah, we've got many aims.
You, sadly, have been bereaved, and may I ask you, please, about your father? He was 73 when he was admitted into hospital, was he not, in January 2021 for cancer-related reasons. Had he been vaccinated when he went into hospital?
No. So my dad, Phil Smith, was diagnosed just as lockdowns came in. With prostate cancer. 2 consultants wrote on his notes that he had prostate cancer, but he wasn't told for 6 months, by which time the cancer had spread. In January, it was fairly routine for him to be admitted on the 5th of January for treatment to reduce edema. And I knew he would be in for up to 2 weeks. And when he was admitted, I asked there and then if he could have the vaccine, and I was told no. I asked if he could have HEPA filters. No, he couldn't have any of that. And so I kind of knew that he was going to catch COVID within the next 2 weeks. It was, undoubted.
It was rife, of course, at that stage.
It really was. And the vaccinations had started coming out on the 8th of December, and I was a carer for an 85-year-old, my mother as well, and so I expected her to be sort of vaccinated relatively soon. But as December went through, I was tweeting like mad, everybody, MPs, MSs, head of NHS, saying, what is going on? Why hasn't my mother been vaccinated? And it soon became apparent that actually in Wales, they were focusing on the healthcare workers and not the age or the most vulnerable. By the 11th of January, Cardiff and Vale Health Board tweeted that up to date, up to the 11th of January, they had vaccinated 12,300 people, of which 69 were in care homes and only 75 were over 80. The rest were all healthcare workers. So, I'm watching the TV getting angry because I'm seeing people on the TV being vaccinated, healthcare workers. They don't even live in my health board area, having vaccinations just simply because they work for that particular health board.
And of course, your father, who was then 73, wasn't a care home resident. He wasn't over 80, and therefore he wasn't in the first two priority lists for vaccination. But he was vulnerable because he was in a hospital where COVID was rampant.
And this is the point. He was under Velindre Cancer Hospital, which is the cancer trust in Wales. And they didn't introduce testing for their patients until I think they started sending out invitations mid-January. It was all too late. For those 7 weeks from when vaccinations were introduced, its focus was on keeping healthcare workers working. It wasn't about saving lives or saving people like my dad who were going into what was and still is the most likely place you'll catch COVID, which is a hospital in Wales.
And Mrs. Smith-Higgins, he sadly died on the 26th of January. Did you terribly, in fact, receive a letter following his death inviting him to attend for vaccination?
That's correct. Yes. It was all bittersweet. As I say, we knew he was going to catch COVID while he was in there. It was heart unventilated. It was rife in there, and we just knew he was going to get it.
And so is one of the main issues which you've sought to raise on the part of your members and of your group, in perhaps the main issue, judging by your statement, the issue of the pace of vaccine delivery in Wales. So it has a number of aspects. One of them you've touched upon already is whether or not there was a decision or a policy such that allowed health and care workers to be vaccinated in advance of vulnerable or elderly people. And secondly, whether or not the programme for vaccination in Wales delivered vaccination as speedily as was reasonably possible at that time.
Absolutely. Was there a policy for keeping people in work or keeping people alive? Because, vulnerable people weren't being vaccinated. Fit and healthy healthcare workers were being vaccinated. So, what was it? Saving lives or keeping them in work?
You refer also in your statement to another related issue, which is that in January 2021, the Welsh Government sought to stagger the rollout at one stage in order to ensure that the persons who helped with the process of vaccination, such as vaccinators, weren't left with nothing to do. They were concerned about the prospect of delivering so many first doses that they ran out of vaccines to deliver. Is that an issue which your group is concerned about?
Well, it is. The fact that they apparently only had 2 places in Wales where they could store these vaccinations is a huge concern. I don't know what else to say about that, really. It just makes no sense, does it?
Another area, and you've touched upon prioritization already, is that a number of your members have expressed concern, have they not, about people they know being missed off the prioritization list as a sector, as a cohort, or members, you also have concerns about members who were on the list. They should have had their vaccination prioritised, but they weren't invited to attend for vaccination.
Yeah, well,
Are there a number of people in that category in your group?
absolutely. And as you'll have come to learn by now through all the modules, data in Wales is appalling. We have a serious issue here with data stats. At the last module, they were trying to identify people by the flavour of their surname as to whether we've a real issue with data in Wales.
And would your group be assisted by hearing evidence on the subject of those persons who suffered from severe asthma and whether or not they were prioritised over those with moderate asthma, whereas in fact anybody suffering from asthma should have been classified as clinically vulnerable and in a particular group for vaccination?
It's a personal concern for me because I am asthmatic and I do use 2 steroid inhalers per day, but I wasn't classed as having a sufficient respiratory problem to be classed as vulnerable. So, yeah, for me, if I'd caught COVID, then I would have been in serious trouble, I'm sure.
A particularly contentious issue, is VCOD, vaccination as a condition of deployment. And you'll be aware, I know, that the English government introduced a policy of mandatory vaccination for care workers in resident care homes in CGQ registered homes. But the other 4 nations, the other home nations, didn't in fact introduce a policy of vaccination as a condition of deployment. Where do your members stand on this issue? Do they regard the non-implementation of such a policy in Wales as a failure, or was the decision not to follow the English lead in having such a policy the right course, do you think?
There's mixed views from our families, and basically what they want is clarification on how our government, having received the exact same information as Westminster government, took a different decision. In Wales, the private care homes were implementing VCARD anyway. So for us, it's clarification on what was the process, what were the thoughts.
In Wales during the pandemic, were you conscious of community pharmacies being properly utilised for the purposes of delivering and rolling out vaccines?
No, again, not at all. As I say, pharmacists had to apply to give out vaccines. It wasn't an automatic thing. There were barriers put in there, and to date, you still don't go through community pharmacies for such things here.
Were there problems, as far as you could tell, with the rollout of vaccines in deprived areas in Wales and also rural areas where obviously there was a great deal more difficulty in terms of the barriers there to getting to a vaccination centre or perhaps getting to a GP or to a community pharmacy?
Absolutely. I live in Cwmbran, and one of the mass vaccination centres was actually here in our town. It was the one that Boris Johnson visited, actually. And even for us, under an Iron Bevan Health Board, the Health Board area is huge. And so, for example, somebody travelling from Ebbw Vale would have to travel in the car for 40 minutes to get to that vaccination centre in Cwmbran. Somebody travelling by bus would have to catch numerous buses, and it would probably take them an hour and a half. Now, for people who've been, shielding for months and months and months, to suddenly have to take an hour and a half journey within the same health board, to then stand outside for an hour and a half queuing to get into a sports centre, it wasn't the best thought out, to be honest.
Your statement also refers to a number of other groups of people who had difficulties in terms of being able to be offered vaccination or to take up the offer of vaccination. are two such groups about whom particular concern has been expressed to you: those suffering from disabilities, disabled people, and also a particular cohort of unpaid carers. Are they two groups of people whose constituent members have often raised their worries to you?
Well, yeah, again, hit the jackpot here because I'm also an unpaid carer. There is no registry of unpaid carers in Wales. There's no register of care homes actually either, but there's no register of unpaid carers. It's really difficult to prove that you're an unpaid carer. I had to fill in a power of attorney to get my GP to believe me that I was actually an unpaid carer. I escorted my mother to get her vaccination. I should have been vaccinated at the same point, really. I believe there was so many of us unpaid carers there with older people taking them in. It just seemed nonsense at the time.
Your statement also refers to concerns expressed by your members about the extent of disinformation and misinformation that was prevalent in Wales. Is that a subject matter or a concern that's widely held in your group, or is that something on the outer margins of their core concerns?
The misinformation, for our families, the vast majority of us was sort of, if you've watched somebody die of COVID, you will take a vaccination to prevent that. We were all of the same sort of thought, get it in our veins. We weren't hesitant in any degree. But that said, in Wales, there is hesitancy, and the approach taken by Welsh Government clearly wasn't good enough, because Muslim Doctors Cymru had to take it upon themselves to go out there and start trying to educate themselves, their own communities with videos and what have you. So there's definitely work to be done there.
Would you like to see the systems for reducing barriers and increasing confidence in vaccines improved in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, this data is really bad in Wales. In England, you'll have an NHS app with all your information on there, your vaccine history and what have you. We haven't got that here. You can see your last medications you ordered, and possibly with a bit of luck, book an appointment in 4 months' time for a GP. So, our data, we are streets behind where you are in Wales, and that is a barrier. You couldn't do anything electronically to rebook your appointment, for example. You had to call and go through all that process. And it wasn't made easy to have a vaccination in Wales.
All right. Finally, and certainly not least, a vital part of the pandemic story is, of course, the provision of existing and new therapeutics for those who couldn't take vaccines, the immunocompromised, for example, or those whom vaccines would not bring a substantial benefit. Have a significant number of members of your group asked about whether or not the systems for developing and researching, manufacturing and making available new and existing therapeutics were properly operated, that everything was done in essence that could be done in order to make therapeutics available?
Yeah, 100%. And two points to make on that. The time frame for vulnerable people to get their therapeutic, their antivirals, was 5 days. You had to allow 2 days to get the test sent off and get your results back, which left a 3-day window for most people. That was really tight, trying to arrange to get to the place where they would do it. And secondly, my dad was transferred to a COVID ward on the 21st of January. Before he went onto that ward, I said, great, are you going to pump him up with antiviral steroids? Are you going to get him the fittest he can? Oh, we'll see. He didn't have anything until the day before he died. and that's when they gave him dexamethasone. So, you know, for a lot of our families, they didn't receive anything. They were lucky to get oxygen. So, yes, work needs to be done.
Thank you very much for your assistance.
Thank you very much indeed, Smith Higgins. Given all that you've been through and that you're going through, I'm particularly grateful to you for giving us your help. I hope that now you've given this help, I expect we might be hearing from you again in the future, I don't know. But please just focus on trying to get your husband through the treatment, and we'll keep everything crossed for you.
Thank you very much. And again, my apologies. You know, I would have been there
I
if
know
I
you
could.
would. Thank you.
Thank you.
My lady, the next witness is Ruth O'Rafferty, please.
Could we cut the link to Mrs. Smith Higgins? She's obviously looking for the
Looking for the
end
stop button.
Is there a red button? I don't know. It's all right. I'm told that it'll be done for you remotely. There we go.
To affirm. No, if you stand, take your affirmation. If you'd like to repeat after me, if you'd like to repeat the affirmation after me, I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that
the evidence I shall give
the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
See, there's some water there for you.
Thank you.
I hope you haven't been waiting too long, Sir Rafferty.
Not at all. It's fine.
Could we start, please, with the formality of inviting you to give your full name?
Yes, my name is Ruth O'Rafferty.
Thank you very much. Thank you for attending today, Mrs. O'Rafferty, and for assisting the inquiry. You've kindly provided what can only be described as very lengthy witness statements, 2 witness statements, in fact. The first one dated August 24, and then much more recently, quite late in the day, a very lengthy, I think a 271-page additional statement. But a great deal of care and time and trouble has obviously gone into the preparation of those documents. Thank you very much for those. You've signed both of them. I'd like to start your evidence, please, Mrs. O'Rafferty, by asking you to tell us something about the Scottish Vaccine Injury Group, whom you represent today. We understand that it was initially formed to apply for core participant status in the Scottish inquiry, not the UK inquiry, but the Scottish inquiry. But perhaps more importantly, to provide tailored support for Scottish people who had suffered an adverse reaction to any of the COVID-19 vaccines. Is that right?
That's correct.
Within your group, do we presume, therefore, that there are people who suffered injury, as well as those who, worse, suffered bereavement following vaccination?
Yes, we have both. The majority suffered vaccine injury.
Can you give, please, the inquiry some idea of the size of the Scottish Vaccine Injury Group? How many interests or how many people are you representing, and how many people are you looking after their interests for?
Currently, just approaching 750 people. We have about 680, I believe, in the Facebook group, and we then have a number of individuals who've joined us for the inquiries, so we just message each other and keep in touch by email.
You've set out in your witness statement, we might have it up on the screen, please. It's INQ 000497102 at paragraph 3, the extremely worthy aims of your group. And I would just like to ask you about some of them. You refer in paragraph 3A to the aim of preparing for the Scottish and UK public inquiries. That's self-evident. And you refer in B to the support and encouragement, to which you've already referred, for those who have suffered adverse reactions. And you refer to the Facebook group in C. D, you refer to the sharing of up-to-date information on treatments and therapies. presumably that's a matter of great importance to the members of your group, because you will be privy, no doubt, necessarily over the passage of time, to much more information and detail on treatments and therapies which you've come across, which you can disseminate to their great assistance.
Exactly. And there's a lot of treatments which would be viewed, I suppose, as alternative treatments, like infrared, near-red light panels, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, things that we wouldn't necessarily be recommended on the NHS. And we're part of a global coalition of vaccine injury groups, so we share things with each other globally, which is very useful.
At E, you refer to the aim of seeking to raise awareness of vaccine injury to the public, media, political arena and healthcare system. I referred in my opening, as you probably know, to the public interest in trying to reduce the stigmatization of which you speak in your witness statements surrounding those who believe themselves to have been injured by a vaccine. Is this aim to raise awareness of vaccine injury there because there are many people who doubt whether in fact the vaccines cause injury? And of course, it's a very strongly held view on the part of your members that they have to a large extent been ignored.
Yes.
Is that the nub of this?
Yes. There's been a lot of censorship. In fact, Mark Zuckerman's openly talked about how Facebook removed anything related to vaccine injury. So what we experience when we go into medical appointments are medical professionals who've not seen evidence of vaccine injury in social media or the mainstream media. So we're actually met often with quite a lot of disbelief. And actually, we did a survey in our group to find out how doctors seem to feel about vaccine injury. And 46% of them said, or 46% of the respondents said, that even though doctors said to them, yes, we think this was the vaccine that caused this, they didn't write it in their medical notes. There's an element of fear there that if you speak out against the vaccines, you're going against the societal or cultural expectations that the vaccines are wonderful.
All right. Is it in part because your members feel that they're not being heard, they're not being listened to, and also that there is a degree of ignorance or suspicion perhaps about the injuries that they've suffered, that you have, as you set out at G, also sought to campaign for specialist funded research in specialist centres so that your members can receive the treatment for the injuries which they believe they've suffered from vaccines?
Yes.
Right.
And in fact, Germany, there are specific units that research vaccine injury and long COVID, both, because there is an overlap in symptoms. And we feel that because these were novel technologies that we used for the vaccines, there will be side effects that maybe will be unexpected. And we're very surprised, actually, that nobody has come to us and said, well, look, you are this wonderful research opportunity that we have to find out what's happening as a result of the vaccines. So,
am I right in saying that this is the first occasion on which a representative from your group has given evidence to obviously a public inquiry, but also
yes.
the public by way of a select committee or some sort of organisation?
As far as I know, yes.
Right.
I believe UKCV Family may have spoken to some parliamentary members, but we haven't.
And then the last two subparagraphs, F and H, similarly identify that the aims of the group include trying to signpost people towards help and also setting up the charitable and administrative systems to fund particular treatments that aren't available on the NHS.
Yes.
So that gives us some idea of the aims. Now, in your statements, you have, I should say, and this will come as no surprise to you, I know, raised a vast number of points and issues, spanning the technology of vaccines, the scientific foundations for them, their authorization, their research and development, their delivery, in fact, almost every aspect of vaccination and vaccines. Today, I'd like you, however, to try to help us with expanding on those issues and those concerns that your members hold, with a particular focus on the list of issues, the scope of this inquiry and this module. That there are obviously all number of points and areas and issues which fall wildly outside the scope of this inquiry, and I don't want to take time looking at those. So in no particular order, but it's a topic that you refer to repeatedly in the course of your statements. You identify that one of the main concerns held by your members is of course, the integrity of the regulatory system in the United Kingdom, the degree of scrutiny that was brought to bear on the authorization of vaccines, and whether or not the safety processes were properly operated, and in particular, whether they were designed and operated in a way that would bring safety-related concerns, side effects to light. Is that a fair summary of that particular topic?
Yes.
Do your members have particular concerns about the administrative or legal routes by which the vaccines were authorised? You've referred in the statements to the authorisation process under Regulation 174 of the regulations to which I referred yesterday. What is the concern on the part of your members as to whether it was Regulation A or Regulation B or some other legal route that was operated?
I think I will try to answer that question, and I don't think I'm knowledgeable enough to answer it in great detail. But from our perspective, the MHRA and the government faced a very significant challenge, and they put in place some updated regulations to allow them to authorise vaccines under very fast processes. I'm not really quite sure if I understand exactly what your question is, to be honest.
But are they concerned about the particular legal route or administrative route that was deployed? So are they worried that there was this legal process under Regulation 174 that was used, or are they worried about the way in which, in detail and in practice, the MHRA went about deciding whether to authorise vaccines?
I think the latter. And shall I expand on that just now?
Yes, please do.
Okay. So the one of the main things that we are concerned about is that in 2005, there was a parliamentary review into the influence of the pharmaceutical industry on the regulatory process in the United Kingdom. And they made lots of recommendations all those years ago, which still have not been implemented.
All right, we're in danger of veering off already.
Okay. So that provides some context
right.
for what I'm just about to say.
Please continue.
Mm-hmm. So a normal process when a new medication is brought out is that they'll make a mock-up of a medication or a vaccine for a clinical trial, and then once it's been authorised, they will then upscale and produce a product that can be mass-produced, because you can't, the way something's made for a clinical trial, you can't mass-produce it. These particular vaccines are biologics, and there was a research study that's in...
I'm so sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt you there. We don't have the time or the wherewithal to be able to go into some of these topics in this sort of detail. Could I put it another way to you? Mm-hmm. It is the core concern of your members that does it revolve around the system by which, in reality and in practice, the MHRA authorised the vaccines, including whether they properly scrutinised the manufacturing and process systems for the production of those vaccines, whether or not the safety trials were properly conducted, whether or not the clinical process was subject to the same degree of scrutiny as the rollout process. Are those the sorts of issues that they're worried about?
Shall I put it another way?
Yes, please.
Your fellow members feel that they sacrifice safety at the expense to gain the speed?
Yes. Thank you. Yes.
So it's the rolling review issue. It's the overall speed by which authorisation was granted and the degree to which they examined it.
No, we understand the rolling review allowed them to see things a lot sooner, so they were able to scrutinise things much more quickly than they would normally, and we don't have a problem with that. What we have a problem with is the upscaled product. Because these are biologics, and because the process defines the product, if you change any little thing in the manufacture of a biologic, the temperature, the ingredients, where it's made, you can get a different product. And there was concerns raised that whether the upscaled product was comparable to the clinical trial product.
As I've said, the two processes, the one
That's
that
right.
underpinned the clinical research and the one that underpinned the at-scale manufacturing.
Correct.
All right. I think we're clear. From your statements, it appears that there are wider issues raised also by your members about the degree to which the data, the trials, the studies and the statistics were properly scrutinised, whether they were accurate, and whether or not the MHRA had before it all the necessary information they needed to properly make a decision on authorisation.
Yes.
Yes? All right. There's quite a strong scientific edge. There are a lot of scientific issues raised in your statements. A great many paragraphs devote themselves to concerns by your group on the technology underlying vaccines. So, for example, vector-based vaccines, the mRNA technology, the use of lipid nanoparticles, I could go on. Is the scientific technological basis of the vaccines a matter of concern for your members? Or are they concerned about the administrative impact, that is to say, the decision to authorise?
All of the above.
All the above?
Yes.
All right.
These are mRNA vaccines have never before been authorised for use in the public. And because they were brought out in such a massive scale, our concerns are that there wasn't enough vigilance, that doctors were not aware. For example, we had somebody who ended up in hospital paralysed for months. And we discovered that she had the same diagnosis as a condition that appeared in the AstraZeneca trial. Had her doctors known that that had happened during the AstraZeneca trial, the trial was actually paused.
Right. There's a number of, I perfectly understand that you hold those beliefs, but there's a number of assertions or observations made in the course of that answer, which we haven't got time to unpick now. The overarching view, though, or the overarching position is, you are worried about the scientific superstructure or underpinning of vaccines and whether or not it was properly understood when it came to authorising their use in the United Kingdom. Is that the heart of it?
Yes, whether the doctors actually understood this is a brand new technology, if they had understood the conditions that had arisen during the clinical trials or not, because had they known, they may have been better prepared to diagnose more quickly,
right.
And then those conditions wouldn't have advanced to the stage they did where there's irreparable damage.
Or they would have been treated perhaps in a different way.
Yes.
Right. Much of your statements is concerned with the separate but no less important issue of public messaging. Mm-hmm. That is to say, informing the public about vaccines, about their benefits, about their risks, and about the specific emerging knowledge about the very rare risks that vaccines might give rise to in a number of different ways. So, were you and are you concerned about the whole patient information leaflet process? Whether or not it gave the public enough information, whether or not they were updated in sufficient time when new data and new understanding came to light, whether or not people, when they received their vaccines, understood that there was a patient information leaflet available which might or might not have the right degree of data. Is that the broad area?
A lot of our members were not given a leaflet until after they'd received their vaccination, which means they didn't really have informed consent. They didn't know what they were consenting to. And the leaflets really, we now know the level of damage and the level and breadth of injury that can result.
Well,
and these are not listed in the leaflet.
Right, so your general position is that you believe that there was more injury, more damage, more harm done than was being indicated by the patient and public-facing leaflets and information, both from the MHRA, from the government, and from these public information documents.
Yes, and the doctors rely on the Green Book, for example, and that only mentions myocarditis, thrombosis, and Guillain-Barré syndrome, really. And we have so many more other undoubted vaccine reactions.
Another topic, another important issue is, and raised by your members, is whether or not, despite there not being a formal vaccine as a condition of deployment policy in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, that they feel that there's a perception, or that they perceive that people were nevertheless coerced, publicly or privately, into taking vaccines. So is the heart of the concern expressed on this topic whether or not the state, the government, were fair and open in describing the benefits and the risks so that people could make a decision individually for themselves without feeling they were under a degree of coercion?
Well, we had language even in the...
I don't want to go into the detail
of
specific cases, because we can't do anything about specific cases, but is that a proper summary, if you like, of the overarching
the published message was you would take the vaccine to save everyone else, that you were selfish not to, you were responsible not to. And we did have lots of people in our group who were in the medical profession who were coerced. We even had somebody who had emails distributed around their workplace naming and shaming people who hadn't yet had their vaccine.
All right. You understand, of course, that we can't delve into individual cases.
No.
But the overarching point is you're concerned about why it was that some people felt they were being coerced or they were under pressure, and whether or not they were given the right information to be able to make a decision free from coercion.
Yes.
That's the heart of it. All right. The yellow card reporting scheme is obviously a vital part of the safety structures in the United Kingdom. Is that a general topic about which your members have expressed a great deal of concern? In essence, whether or not it properly allowed people to record, to register with the government and the authorities adverse effects which they believe they'd encountered, and also whether or not, going the other route, the yellow card scheme and the MHRA kept people properly informed about the position. Is that the heart of the concern?
A lot of people have never heard of the yellow card when they join the group, to be honest. And then we have people who haven't been able to access the yellow card again. They can't find it. The yellow card scheme is a passive reporting scheme, as you know, so it's reliant on people knowing about it. And the government does, by their own admission, say between 1% and 10% of people actually report to the yellow card.
And it's obviously a scheme whereby members of the public and medics can report. And so your position is that people weren't made properly aware of the availability of the yellow card system to allow them to report.
Yes, although it does say about the yellow card in leaflets. But our experience is that doctors were not reporting to the yellow card, even though they said to us that they felt that the vaccine was responsible. And in fact, the Green Book says that all doctors should, even if they're not sure, they should report it to yellow card, and then MHRA will make the decision whether or not there was a causation there or not. So yes, we feel that the yellow card is not fit for purpose. I know that I asked for a copy of my yellow card, and they put that a lot of my symptoms had been resolved when they haven't. So I don't know where they got that information from.
And finally, another scheme, no less important, but it's one that appears to be of huge concern and worry to members in your group and other groups, I should say, is the vaccine damage payment scheme.
Yes.
Has it been the experience of your members that where they've made applications under the scheme, that they've simply not been dealt with sufficiently speedily or at all, or got a positive response? And no doubt you would argue that the actual terms of the scheme, the preconditions for an award, and it's not a compensatory award, but for an award, are overly onerous and impossible in practice to meet.
Yes. I mean, how can you prove you're 60% disabled when your condition fluctuates from day to day? It's actually the response that I get from group members, overwhelming responses. It's a very traumatic experience to go through. Because a lot of them, I mean, I'm having quite, I'm losing my words here, but a lot of us are neurologically impacted. So we find it difficult to communicate. And we have some people who are so badly injured that they can't actually write. So they're trying to get medical records from here, there, and everywhere, collate it all, and they have to prove causation. I mean, how can a normal layperson do that? It's very traumatic. And then when the results come back, and a lot of them, most of them come back the first time round as rejected. And some of the reasons are utterly ridiculous, to be honest. Somebody was accused that
We don't need to worry about individual cases.
Individual members, okay.
Thank you very much, Mrs. O'Rafferty. If I may say so, you've been a very fine advocate, despite your own words, in the interest of your members. But that gives us a very helpful understanding of where the main points of concern are and the scope of them.
I was about to say something similar. You say that people very often have problems communicating, but thank goodness today you obviously feeling on top form for communication, although I appreciate your condition may change on different days. The thing I was quite particularly interested in was you talked about the research in Germany about both vaccine injury and long COVID. And I've been going through your statement, and don't worry, I will go through it all in some detail before I reach any findings. Again, I have been through it, but I'll go through it again. But I was interested because a lot of the concerns that your members have echo the concerns that long COVID sufferers have. Recognition, of course, being one of the primary ones, and then the kind of support and treatment that you need. So I was quite interested to hear you talk about that research. Anyway, thank you very much indeed for your help. I'm really grateful to you. I hope it hasn't been too difficult getting here and getting home.
Thank you.
Ms. Morris, I understand that you and your team represent this witness and the next one. So would it help if I took the afternoon break now? Okay. It's a bit earlier than we normally do, but just so that Ms. Morris and the team can talk to you before you go. And I shall come back. If I said 20 minutes, Ms. Morris, would that help so you can have a chance to talk properly? Very well. 20 minutes, whatever that is from now.
All rise.
Ms. Madison.
My lady, the next witness is Kate Scott, please.
Repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Are you okay, Ms. Scott?
Yes, thank you.
Ms. Scott, could you give your full name to the inquiry, please?
Yeah, Mrs. Kate Scott.
Thank you very much for attending the inquiry today and assisting with the evidence that you're going to give. A few preliminary matters, if I may.
Yep.
I'm going to ask you to keep your voice up. Don't speak too quickly. Speak into the microphone so that the stenographers can make a record of everything you're saying. And if I ask a question that isn't clear, please don't hesitate to ask me to repeat it.
Okay.
You have provided a witness statement on behalf of Vaccine Injured Bereaved UK, or VIB UK, and that is INQ 474371. Are the contents of that statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
They are, yes.
Now, I'd like to start, please, by asking you some questions about VIB UK, its aims and membership. You explain in your statement that VIB UK is a UK-wide campaign and support group consisting of individuals and families who have either been severely injured or bereaved as a result of receiving a COVID-19 vaccine. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Everyone in our group has medical confirmation that their injuries or the death of their loved one was caused by the vaccine.
It's fair to say, is it, that one of VIB UK's central aims is to achieve reform of the Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme, or VDPS?
Yeah, that's correct. The scheme is inadequate and inefficient. It offers too little, too late, too few.
And that is something we will come back to
Yep.
in the course of your evidence. You note in your statement that your organisation did not exist before the pandemic and you had to create it. And you say this is a symptom of poor planning on the part of the government, which in your view overlooked the potential for vaccine injury and bereavement.
Yeah, we feel like an uncomfortable truth, and we were made to feel like you were the only ones or you were the unlucky ones, and just get on with it. And that's impossible when you're grieving a loved one, or your husband's in intensive care in a coma for 4 weeks and 5 days, and there was no one to speak to, and there was no one to help us. So we've had to, in the worst circumstances, come together and try and navigate through this as a group.
I think you may be alluding there to your own personal experience, and again, that is something we will come back to
Yep.
and explore with you in more detail. But just staying for the moment, please, with the group itself and its aims. You express your gratitude to the chair in your statement for giving VIB UK core participant status in this module of the inquiry. And I want to emphasise that in making that decision, the inquiry acknowledges the experiences of those who have suffered adverse effects following vaccination and is of the view that this will help to counter the stigmatisation which you speak about in your statement.
Yeah, hopefully.
You stress that VIB UK is not anti-vaccination, but rather pro-fairness. Could
Yeah.
you expand on that, please?
Yeah, how can we be anti-vaccination when everyone in our group stepped forward and took a vaccine that the government told us was safe and effective? Everybody in our group is either injured or bereaved as a result of doing so. So you cannot be anti-vaccination if you're injured from a vaccine that you took.
You make the point that if there is not a proper system of redress for those who have suffered injury and bereavement, it will fuel vaccine hesitancy in the future.
Yeah, I
which is
think
something you want to avoid.
Yeah, 100%. So I think Mr. Keith yesterday stated that it is accepted that vaccines or no medicine is 100% safe and effective. Therefore, there should be a fair compensation scheme, and the government should have planned for that, knowing that if nothing is 100% safe and effective and it's being rolled out to so many people, there would be injuries and there would be deaths, and we should have got the help and support and the financial compensation to be able to continue to live our lives.
Staying with VIB UK and the support that it provides, is it right that it's created its own support group for those who have been injured and bereaved by the vaccines? And if so, what sort of support does it provide?
Yeah, so mainly we're a campaign group campaigning for VDPS reform, but we soon realised that we had no one to talk to who had this shared experience of almost being pushed into the shadows during the pandemic. We're an uncomfortable truth, but we are a truth, and the truth is, for everybody in our group, the vaccine caused serious harm and death. So it's not a formal thing. We have a group WhatsApp. People talk about it on it daily. You can ask to speak to people individually, and just a safe place to share your grief or your concerns or your challenges, because there wasn't anywhere. There still isn't anywhere other than that.
Alongside the group chat that you've spoken about and the safe space for people, you talk in your statement about hosting a video call every 6 weeks to offer support, and enabling members to work together on campaigning for change.
Yeah, and just to catch up, and we send monthly updates on the work that we've been doing, because it's so difficult and emotionally draining. We're 4 years in now with very little change having happened and very little of our voices being listened to. Some people have to dip in and out because we're also trying to navigate life with disability or life without a loved one.
Could we please have on the screen page 4, paragraph 10 of Mrs. Scott's statement? And here you set out VIB UK's hopes in relation to its participation in the inquiry. We just look at these, please.
Yep.
You asked that it result in 3 key outcomes. First, to highlight the fact of vaccine injury and bereavement. Second, to remove the stigma suffered by those who are vaccine injured or bereaved. And third, to compel the government and pharmaceutical companies to look again at how to deal with the inconvenient fact of vaccine injury and bereavement and the effect it's had on those who have been affected. Is that right?
Yeah.
That can come down from the screen, thank you. We've dealt with the group, its aims, the support that it offers, its membership. You are, of course, a member of that group, and the reason you're a member of the group is because of the experience that your husband Jamie had following vaccination.
Yep.
Could you tell us, please, about the impact on Jamie as well as the impact on you and your family?
I can, yeah. Just one last thing about VBK, though, is that the primary causes of the injuries in our group are vaccine-induced thrombotic thrombocytopenia, VIT, Guillain-Barré syndrome, vasculitis, and more. They're all confirmed conditions, so there's a range of conditions. My husband Jamie had VIT, vaccine-induced thrombotic thrombocytopenia. He is a walking miracle. Every day I'm filled with gratitude that he's still alive, but his brain injury is the size of a credit card. His relationship with me, and mostly his relationship with our children, will never be the same again. And I have this constant conflict of that gratitude with the grief that goes with how different life is. And then the guilt for the others in our group who I know would just want 5 more minutes with their loved one. Jamie is amazing. He was in a coma for 4 weeks and 5 days. He's had significant brain surgery, and he was in rehab for 124 in total. When he came home, he was able to watch our son's nativity, but in a very different way. He's blind in both of his eyes in his upper right quadrant. He'll never drive. He'll never live totally independently. He can't look after our children for long periods of time independently. He can't split and divide his attention. He has no high functioning ability. He has short-term memory loss. He has processing information challenges. He has auditory challenges. He has chronic fatigue. He has severe headaches. He's had over 300 medical appointments since we've been home, and they're ongoing. And just everything is different, from how he responds to situations, to how he shows his emotions, to how he interacts with our children.
I take it from what you've said that he is unable to work.
Yeah, he'll never be able to work again. He had a really high-functioning, high-stressful, multi-international job that he loved, and he was just as cool as a cucumber. He balanced me out, and now he's got all these new feelings, and he often describes that he can see this video playing in his head and how he should respond and how should things come out, but the bit in between is it all gets muddled. So he's got aphasia, which means that sometimes he can't find or think of the right word, which might mean he calls our children the wrong name, or he'll go upstairs to get something and come down with something completely different, or he'll go to the shop with some support and he'll forget what he's gone to get and come out with different things that don't make up a shopping list that you can't cook anything with. But every day he tries, and it's tiring, and we're grateful that he's alive, but at the moment he doesn't feel like he's living, and he was full of so much life.
Given the impact, is it right that your family and Jamie have made a claim to the vaccine damage payment scheme?
We have, yeah, and it was successful, which is an awful thing to have a phone call to say congratulations. We have confirmed that your injury has been caused by the vaccine and that your husband is 60% or more disabled. That's not the case for everyone in our group. People are rejected on such different disability percentages, which I know we're going to cover. But for Jamie, I think the national average salary is £30,000. He will never work again. He was on much more than that. Our house is based on that. Our lifestyle was based on that. I'm no longer working. I also had a career job, but caring for our children, making sure they get to school safely is my responsibility. Taking Jamie to his appointments is my responsibility. Looking after him in those appointments because he can't process medical information, being his advocate everywhere I go, making sure he's safe, stops me from being able to work full time, and that puts a real stress. I don't think that doing the thing the state asked you should put us at risk of losing our house, or people in our group having to use a food bank, having to move house because they can no longer afford it. That's just extra trauma to what we're already struggling through.
Thank you for sharing your account of vaccine injury and telling us about what happened to Jamie and you and your family.
Thank you.
I'd like to move now to talk about some of the broader issues that you have personal experience of and which your members are deeply concerned about. And we will start with the vaccine damage payment scheme.
Okay.
You say, and you have said already today, that it is not fit for purpose in your view and has systemic inadequacies and inefficiencies. And it's some of those concerns that you have about the scheme that I'd like to turn to now. The first is the time it takes to process claims. And in your witness statement, you set out some figures you obtained as a result of a Freedom of Information Act request, which show that as of the 3rd of October 2023, there had been 7,544 claims related to COVID-19 vaccines, and only 3,519 claimants had been notified of an outcome. 361 claims had been awaiting a decision for more than 12 months. Of those, 150 claims had been awaiting a decision for more than 18 months.
Yep. And awfully, the data has changed and those numbers are worse. So as of the 30th of November 2024, there's 17,519 claims to the VDPS. Only 194 of those have been notified that they're entitled to the payment. 416 people have been told that they are unsuccessful because although causation is met, they are not, inverted commas, disabled enough. And of that, there's 1,027 people still waiting 12 months later. Within that, 438, 18 months, and 126 are still waiting nearly 3 years later for the outcome of their claim.
What sort of impact is this having on your members, the amount of time they're having to wait for these claims to be processed?
Well, most of them have lost their jobs, so paying mortgages, paying rent, feeding your children, feeding your family. Some people there, Dr. Stephen Wright, he died from VIT, one of the first within our group. His wife has lost his income. She looked after the family and brought up a beautiful household that's now without a daddy and without fair income.
Another issue you raise about the VDPS is the application form and problems encountered by your members when completing the application form. What are those problems?
So Jamie's came back and they reviewed over 3,000 pages of medical data. So I understand that takes time. Originally, you had to print out the form and you could only handwrite the answer. When people first applied, there wasn't even a box to tick that someone had died. So you had to write that yourself and write your own tick box to mark that the person you were claiming for had passed away.
You say that the paper application system and questions are antiquated and inept.
Yep.
Would you like to see reform of the process for making the application?
Yeah, along with the whole scheme. I believe they've made a couple of changes, so there is now a kind tick box to say your loved one has died, and you can fill it out online. But it's not if anyone's ever had to fill out any of these forms, it's pages long, it's brutal, and if you're grieving or are not used to using computers or having all of that information or having the support of someone, you're just again left to do it on your own. And you can see from how much the numbers have grown that people are still only finding out that there is even this scheme available.
Another aspect of the scheme is the 60% disablement criteria in order to qualify for a payment under the scheme. Could you explain to us the problems that has posed for your members?
A percentage disablement is also somewhat offensive, I feel, but regardless of if it's 10% or 59% or Jamie way over 60% or dead, I guess that's 100% disabled. There's no compensation if you fall below that. We only saw yesterday in the video the consequence of being told, sorry, you're only 55% disabled. It's awful, it's devastating, and then there's nothing for no one to help. Someone in our group was told they were only 20% disabled. It took another year to do the mandatory reversal, and then they were told, oh, actually, you're 90% disabled. Congratulations, here you go. There's other people who are 59% disabled in our group, and only if you've got the strength and will to carry on can you fight that system that is so set against us.
Would you like to see the threshold lowered or some other reform? Have you got any ideas for how it could change?
There's many other schemes across the world. I don't think I'm expert in that, other than saying if you did something that the state was told you was safe and effective and that wasn't the case, then there should be fair and adequate compensation. That's on a sliding scale of the impact. Like Jamie will never work again. So that's £120,000. If the national average salary is £30,000, is gone very, very quickly in a very expensive world.
That is the next thing, in fact, that I was going to come on to, which is the fact that the payment under the scheme is limited to £120,000. What would you like to see change about that?
Again, it's nothing compared to what would be seen through civil or through the courts, and we're always told that it is not a compensation scheme, and yet legal action is costful, stressful, complex, and for many are unable to get legal representation, even though causation has been confirmed. So again, it comes back to this acceptable safety profile. Mainstream media, the government, pharmaceutical companies tell us that we fall within this acceptable safety profile. How many are acceptable? One life? Should that not have been enough to pause and just have a look because there were other options? Or 441 people had VIT, 81 of those died. Not everyone has got access to legal support, and we shouldn't have to do it. There should be a compensation scheme that supports those people who are injured and bereaved.
This is a point that I know it's important for you to make, that it's about what is an acceptable safety profile and what does that mean in terms of the people who are vaccine injured and bereaved, and what sort of scheme should be in place for them. Is that right, that if there is going to be a recognition,
I think it damages future trust in vaccines, that if you are this unlucky number or this rare number, but bearing in mind for our group it's not rare. Statistics are interesting, aren't they? Within our group, 100% of the people in it was not safe and effective. That is the fact within our group, and we have always had the truth on our side, and the truth is for everyone in our group and the others who don't even know about our group yet, the vaccine was not safe and effective. And this was mostly people who were fit and healthy. Jamie didn't take a medicine in his life. He surfed, he ran. We played rugby and football with the children, all things that he's now unable to do and will never be able to do again. We were known as being the couple, the last two on the dance floor, and this birthday I danced on my own because he's not able to be in that loud, noisy environment.
Sorry to interrupt, I really am, but I think I'm going to have to stop you because it's really difficult for me venturing into the area of where we're talking about scientific evidence and acceptable safety levels. That's something we'll discuss with the experts, and I'm really sorry, but it's more of a scientific, evidence-based, as opposed to just the individual circumstances.
No, that's what we're asking. We want you to look at that, and no one has told us what that is, and if it is acceptable, why is there not a fair compensation scheme? I'm not a scientist, but Boris Johnson wrote to me and told me we are not a statistic, we would not be ignored, and all the time all we're told is we're very rare and we are a statistic, and I'm here to say that no, we're not. Our lives are destroyed, and everyone in the audience today who's to support us, so are theirs. It's not just my story. There's many others who have had their voices silenced and told that we are an acceptable safety profile and get on with your life.
At that point, I totally understand. I was just trying to avoid going down the path of analysing at this stage.
Yeah, no, I wasn't trying to do that. Yeah. Thank you.
You deal with a number of points in your statement. We won't have time to go through all of them in great detail now, but I just want to identify some of the other concerns in headline form that you have identified.
Yep.
One of them is around communication about safety issues. And you raised the point that, in your view, there should have been clearer communication about the risks associated with the vaccines, and that they should have been communicated to healthcare professionals and the public so that people could be on the lookout for the types of symptoms that could arise. Is that right?
Yeah, so earlier action and clearer risk communication, we think, could have saved lives. People within our group called ambulances 3 times to be told it was a migraine. It was only on the 4th, when they were seizing in bed, that they were taken to hospital, and that was because the risk and the framework had not been communicated to everyone. Or you were not allowed to even suggest that vaccines caused injury and bereavement. Posts were removed online of death certificates saying it was misinformation. Accounts were closed, and there was no one to say, hang on a minute, if we know it's going to be, that it's accepted that there's risk, there should be a safety process of emotionally and medically supporting these people and helping them afterwards.
Another area of concern for your members is the post-marketing surveillance system in the UK, including the yellow card scheme, and people being aware of that scheme and reporting properly through the scheme. You'd like to see that examined as part of the inquiry, is that right?
As far as we can see, nothing happens after you input that data. So Jamie had a yellow card. Many in our group have got yellow cards. No one has ever contacted me about it. No one has followed up. People's have got lost. People's weren't registered. Sheila Ward's husband, Stephen Ward, who died, she had to contact them to say, oh, just to let you know, he's passed away. He died from his condition because no one followed up. And again, in other countries, after only 1 instance of this particular condition, and there are more confirmed conditions, but for VIT, for example, 1 instance of it meant that they could pause it and they reviewed it to say, what's happening here? Other countries changed much quicker on what age range was being offered that particular vaccine.
So this is the speed of the regulatory response in the UK to the blood clot safety issue. That's something that you want the inquiry to examine. Is that right?
Yeah, because they have acted quick. Same for Guillain-Barré syndrome. My understanding is the quicker you're helped, the better the outcomes are. VIT is my expertise area because that's what happened to Jamie. But there are other conditions that the same. People were not listened to when they said, I think this is because of the vaccine. If they had been, and if medical people were able to get the right pathways in, then people's outcomes could have been better.
You also question whether the yellow card scheme is adequate in that it is a voluntary reporting scheme. Would you like to see some assessment on the part of the inquiry as to whether it is useful to have a mandatory reporting scheme?
Again, I'm not an expert, but I think it should be mandatory. If I turned up to A&E, they asked mandatory questions of things, and that should have been one of them. You know, have you had a vaccine, which is a foreign thing within your body within a certain amount of time? Because especially for certain conditions like Jamie, there's a time frame that is crucial that it only happens in, and if you catch it quickly, outcomes might have been better. Many people, Zion, Lisa Shaw, might still be with us. We will never know that, but had it been communicated properly, then they might have got the right help and support they needed quicker.
Mrs. Scott, we have gone over a large number of concerns in the course of your evidence, and I want to thank you for the clarity of your answers and for sharing your personal experiences
Can I just ask one really last quick thing, is when you speak to all the other experts, the scientists, the pharmaceuticals and the government, is just to remember that we are people, so they can easily omit or not include or not discuss vaccine injury. We know for a fact, I am the fact, these people over here are the fact. It did happen, and they cannot continue to ignore it. Sorry is a strong word, and helping us would make a difference.
Thank you very much indeed, Mrs. Scott. I'm truly sorry to hear about your husband's
Thank you.
condition. It must have been extraordinarily difficult for
It
you,
still
for
is,
him,
yeah.
for the children.
Thank you.
And I do understand your concerns. I may have intervened about one aspect, but that's only because I think that's for expert witnesses. But I do understand your concerns, and certainly the point you make about your human beings, of course you are.
Yeah.
And I shall be examining the issues that you've raised very carefully.
Thank you, because
So
there's
thank you
children
very
without daddies and children with disabled daddies, and just remember that when they try and pretend that we're not important, we are important, and we're part of this pandemic story.
I do understand.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stevenson.
My lady, the next witness is Cameron Malik.
Sincerely and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that
the evidence I shall give
the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth.
Can we just pause? I'm sorry. When the oath's being taken, I can't have people moving around. I'm really sorry. The oath is very important. Sorry. Can we start again, please?
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that
the evidence I shall give
the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the
the
truth,
whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. This.
I hope you're all warned, Mr. Marriott, that you'll be the last witness of the day. I'm sorry if it's taken a long time to get to you.
Not at all.
Please, could you say your full name?
It's Cameron Malik.
Mr. Malik, thank you for attending today to assist the inquiry. Just a few preliminary matters. You've heard it said before, but please speak up into the microphone and take it slowly. You have kindly produced two witness statements for Module 4 of the inquiry. The first is dated the 18th of July 2024, and it is INQ 000474256, a statement on behalf of disabled people's organisations, and a supplementary statement dated the 19th of November 2024, INQ 000474610. Can you confirm that you have read both of those statements recently and that you're satisfied their contents are true?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. I'm going to start with a few background matters about your organisation. Is it right that both of those statements have been prepared in cooperation between 4 disabled people's organisations?
Yes, that's correct.
And those are Disability Rights UK, Inclusion Scotland, Disability Action Northern Ireland and Disability Wales?
That's correct, yeah.
You are the Chief Executive Officer of Disability Rights UK, is that correct?
I am.
I'll be using shorthand DPO throughout your evidence to refer to disabled people's organisations. In terms of who makes up your membership, you explain in your statement that the DPO used the term disabled people to mean people facing disabling social barriers due to their impairments or conditions regardless of their age. And this includes physical impairments, mental health conditions, hearing difficulties, deafness, visual impairments, learning difficulties and neurodiversity. Is that an accurate representation of the people that you're representing?
Yes, that's correct. We represent all disabled people, yeah.
Can you give the inquiry an idea of the number of disabled people that there are in the UK who may be affected by the issues that we're going to discuss in your evidence?
So in total, the UK population, 23% of the UK population would be seen as disabled people. So we're talking about 14 million individuals.
And between all 4 DPO, you have a substantial reach across all 4 nations, a network of partner organisations and individual members. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
What kind of services do DPO offer? Could you explain that in overview?
Sure. So the 4 national organisations that I'm representing today and that are part of this group, we would see ourselves as kind of like the second-tier organisations, and we often will have lots of local and regional disabled people's organisations that are members of our organisations. But all of us also have direct contact with individual disabled people as well, and we act as their voice on a national basis, really. In terms of services, it can vary from direct services, such as in Northern Ireland, there's a transport service that's delivered by Disability Action Northern Ireland. Disability Rights UK delivers helplines, so a disabled student helpline, independent living helpline, which are those direct services. But outside of that, it's a lot of advocacy and kind of representation work that we do.
And does that include engagement with government departments on key issues, raising awareness and campaigning in that way?
Yes, I mean, a lot of our advocacy naturally engages with government and governmental bodies.
I'm going to turn now to the key issues affecting your members within what we're looking at in Module 4. First, dealing with the inclusion of disabled people in the development and trials of vaccines and therapeutics. You identify in your statement concerns about gaps in engagement with governments, which, if I might put it this way, left disabled people out of the conversation in terms of trials and development. Can you tell the inquiry about those concerns?
Sure. So I think it's really important to recognise where disabled people are in our society. We're often unseen, unheard. We don't have access to power. We often don't have representation in government, in places where decisions are made, where legislation is written, where guidance is designed. And therefore, those spaces have a complete absence of our lived experience of what it's actually like to live as a disabled person in our country. And so without that knowledge and information, decisions get made, and we often refer to it as ableist thinking. So it's designed by people who don't experience the lives that we do, and therefore design those things as they would see them. They don't walk in our shoes, they don't travel in my wheels, as it were, so they don't experience the barriers that we do. And so hence, we as organisations, we feel it's really imperative that the government has robust engagement systems and mechanisms in place that are ongoing, that they don't just try to create them as and when needed, but are ongoing and long-term as required actually to the UK government by the UNCRPD, of which we're a signatory to that treaty.
And just bring that to apply directly to the trials and development of vaccines and therapeutics. Was it a concern of your organisation that without inclusion in that process, disabled people may have doubts or difficult questions about the safety of vaccines and therapeutics for your members?
Well, absolutely. So there's an inherent levels of uncertainty, mistrust within health systems from a lot of disabled people, just because of the experience that we've had of the system ongoing in our lives. We're often we're often told that others know best for what's best for us, that we're not experts in our own lives and our own conditions that we live with day in, day out. And so our concern was that when in this pandemic, so much emphasis was being put on that the vaccine was our way out of it, that there was no central voice of disabled people in our organisations in the whole complete planning system, from the point of kind of testing to deployment to kind of the whole range of things, really.
If we could move on then to prioritisation decisions for vaccines, part of that deployment system that you talk about, which affected disabled people and the clarity of communication. You point out in terms of representation, advice on prioritisation was issued by the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, the JCVI. And you had concerns about the representation of disabled people or their voices within the JCVI and its subcommittees when making prioritisation decisions. What were your concerns there?
Well, our concerns was when they were creating the prioritisation list of how, so they were making decisions based on their medical understanding, but they were taking no account of how someone who had a medical condition, underlying health condition, how they structured their lives that actually would put them at risk of catching the virus and potential worse outcomes. And so therefore, lots of disabled people weren't included in, for example, the clinically extremely vulnerable list, who actually would still have had particularly poor outcomes had they have caught the virus. The fact that over 65s were prioritised, and so therefore all the adult population of disabled people who would potentially be at risk of adverse outcomes were not included in the initial rollout and prioritisation list. So where people were placed within those prioritisation was a concern to us.
Well, perhaps if we could move on to look more closely at that concern now about where people were placed and how their placement was communicated to the disabled community. You point specifically to the membership of cohorts, priority cohorts 4 and 6 within your statement, you make the point that there was no specific priority cohort for disabled people.
No.
That disabled people had to fit in or qualify within other groups. Initially, as you've just explained, high-risk adults under 65 years of age were in Category 6. That was the September 2020 provisional advice published by the JCVI. You point out that captured a lot of disabled people because many were clinically extremely vulnerable, and that made them high risk. But the position changed, didn't it? That clinically extremely vulnerable people were then moved to Category 4 at the end of December 2020, whilst others with specific underlying conditions remained in Category 6. So I'm taking us through with some simplifying the changes that happened. What was your concern about those changes that I've described and the ease of understanding for disabled people about which category they fell into?
Sure. So the first thing to say is the CEV list wasn't perfect and certainly wasn't complete because it was expanded later on. But irrespective of that, if I look at myself, I was not included in that list, in any list. So I didn't have my first call up for a vaccine until April 2021. And yet my own medical professional people told me that I was at high risk because of lung capacity. And so if I'd have caught it, I think it's really important to remember that millions of people weren't included in the CEV list, even though that was then prioritized. Outside of that, the communication systems that then told people where they fitted in, what list they were in, when their prioritization, when they would be called up, was not accessible in itself. The whole communication output from government lacked accessibility on so many levels. And if we just take, for example, the NHS standard on accessible information, which has been in law since 2017, wasn't applied. People were receiving letters that were not in easy read or accessible information. People who, blind people were receiving letters that were telling them something, but they had no access how to read it. And particularly at a time when we were during a lockdown, when the current the support systems that people would have relied on suddenly weren't available to them. So people with learning disabilities, for example, if they're receiving notification by post and it's not an easy read, they can't then interpret what that tells them.
Was it also the case that your own organisation was giving advice to some of those you represent that they would need to go to the GP themselves and between them and the GP work out what category they might fall into and whether they were entitled to a vaccine?
Absolutely. So part of what we took on upon ourselves, both as national organisations and our member organisation, was that kind of role to try and help interpret what was being sent to people and what they should do.
I want now to ask you about prioritisation decisions affecting people with learning disabilities. To put this into context, you explain in your statement that the JCVI prioritisation advice at the beginning of December 2020 included people with severe and profound learning disability within Priority Group 6. And that then changed and expanded at the end of February 2021 to include all of those on the GP Learning Disability Register, in addition to some other named conditions. So in other words, initially only people with severe and profound learning disability were included in Priority Cohort 6, and then that definition was expanded. Please, can you explain the concerns that you have about that decision-making?
Okay, so I think the first thing to say is people with learning disability don't self-label themselves like that. And so individuals don't think, oh, well, I'm profound and profound.
Severe and profound.
Severe and profound, and mild and moderate. So because people are not identifying as that, they wouldn't know which category they fitted into in the first place. I think there are also issues that there are no registers in places like Scotland for people with learning disabilities, so that couldn't work. And it kind of speaks to what I said earlier about why the JCVI actually chose to go down categorising that way, when there is existing data and no knowledge that people with learning disabilities and those have higher rates of death through health-related issues. And so there's pre-existing data on that, on the kind of mortality rates of people with learning disability, and yet that didn't seem to come into the decision here, and these kind of split groups. And the other thing to say is, while the JCVI expanded the definition, that was only after, people like our organisations writing to them, but also there was the Joe Wiley radio presenter who was high profile and was able to raise the concern that she had about a family member. So those kind of things started to push them, but that's not what it should take.
When you refer to some of the statistics, I think you point out in your statement that your understanding from studies is that individuals with learning disabilities were 3.6 times more likely to die from COVID, but that statistic didn't separate people into those categories of how
No, that's right.
Severe their disability might be. It was for all people
That's correct,
who were within that group. You have also expressed concern in your statement about prioritisation of people with Down syndrome specifically. Could you just tell us what your concerns were there?
So again, it's similar concerns as we had with people with learning disabilities, that those individuals, the risk that they had to worse outcomes from catching the virus were again well known. And again, those individuals were not prioritised. And again, this all comes back to a lack of kind of input from our kind of organisations into the decision-making process.
I'm going to move on now to the issue of unpaid carers and how they were prioritised for vaccination. This is a subject you focused on in your supplementary statement. The timeline here is a relatively complex one, Mr. Malik. We may not have the space to do it justice here, but if I might summarise for context from your statement, was the position that the early, sometimes termed provisional JCVI advice of September 2020 made no reference to unpaid carers. And then there were two versions of advice issued in December at the beginning and then at the end of December 2020, where unpaid carers weren't specifically mentioned in the main text, but they were referred to as a footnote, literally a footnote in the document, in the first instance referring the reader to the Green Book, which contained a list of conditions under which some types of unpaid carers fell, and then secondly as a footnote within the guidance. What were your concerns about the clarity of the JCVI advice, which was implemented for unpaid carers? And more than that, what effect did that have on disabled people and their carers?
First thing I would just say is there was a total lack of clarity. In order to put out a prioritisation list that then required you to look in footnotes and open other documents such as green books, I don't know how many members of the general public would even be aware that there is such a thing as a green book. And then to go and try and read something that's written in a language that speaks to a particular type of individual, those kind of scientists, professionals, but not to the general public layperson who might be trying to find out where they fit in within the prioritisation. To expect members of the public to do that, unpaid carers to be doing that, is just not acceptable. The other thing is, again, it comes back to not understanding how disabled people how we structure our lives, and that a lot of us, much more than most kind of data would tell you, rely on the kind of unpaid support of family, of friends, of other systems that we've put in place to provide us with kind of the day-to-day support we need to live our lives. And because that knowledge was not understood, unpaid carers were not part of the kind of the prioritisation. And again, required our organisations to be kind of advocating on that point that they should be. The impact for disabled people is that if you yourself are at risk of worse outcomes of catching COVID and you are isolating and you're relying on those unpaid carers who are then not eligible for or not able to get the vaccine, you are at greater risk because those carers don't necessarily live with you, but they would be coming into your space. And so if those individuals are not vaccinated, then you're at risk as well. So it creates a real strain on that individual and their relationship with one another.
Were there also some concerns about the definition itself of unpaid carer in its revised form, that it was a person who was the sole or primary carer of an elderly or disabled person at increased risk of COVID-19 mortality and therefore clinically vulnerable? Did you have views on whether that properly served the disabled community?
Well, I think that, again, the risk is this idea that it might be your sole or only person that looks after you or supports you or give you some support. You may have multiple people that provide you support through a week. The other kind of confusions around this was there was an expectation that unpaid carers would apply for carers allowance. That's even if they knew about it, because there was certainly no information going out to people to say who is and who isn't able to claim that particular benefit. And also the time lag between knowing about it, applying for it, and a decision being made would have meant that months would have gone by before you'd be eligible.
Mr. Malik, we perhaps don't have time to go into the issue as it stood in every nation, but you point out in your statement that disabled people across the 4 nations experience differences in the definitions of unpaid carers or the practical ways that they were applied and identified. Was that also the case?
Yes, that's right.
I'm going to move on now to the issue of accessibility, but both in terms of communications about vaccines and therapeutics, and also the accessibility of attending for vaccination. You have already mentioned in your evidence, and you report in your statement, instances of disabled people receiving letters regarding vaccination in non-accessible formats. Can you tell us about those issues and the problems that they caused?
Yes, so if you imagine receiving a letter that has a language that you don't fully understand, it's an official letter that you've received, it's got NHS written at the top, and you can't really quite work out what it's about. The anxiety and stress that might cause you, because you don't know how serious it is, if you're supposed to do something or go somewhere or call someone. So if you can't understand a letter that's officially been sent to you during a very difficult period in the country through a pandemic, that's kind of creates extreme anxiety and stress for those individuals. It also means that person may not then act on anything, may not know what to do with it, particularly if you've got someone with a learning disability and the letter's in kind of standard English or complex English, not in an easy read version or plain English formats. If you're blind and you receive a letter, also, deaf people, English is not their first language. BSL is often the first language. So if you don't have access to all those alternative formats, you won't get the messaging that's coming at you.
And presumably the same goes for booking systems, which need to be accessible in the ways that you've described in terms of plain English, adjusted font, digital and non-digital routes.
Yes, so all of those rules apply, irrespective of the medium that you're choosing to use. Remembering we have a digital divide in the country of those who do and don't have access to internet, web, those kind of technologies, and that is particularly pronounced in disabled people's communities.
And you perhaps falls into one of the things that you would recommend or ask the inquiry to consider, is that it's really important for the health services responsible for contacting disabled people to have a record of their communication preferences, and in a pandemic scenario, for there to be easy access to communication preferences and for those to be used in vaccine booking systems.
It should be the absolute basic. Once you've told the NHS what your preferred communication method is, it should be registered, and everything going out should be in that format.
Not forgetting then, finally on this point, the physical accessibility of going to get a vaccine for disabled people. Can you explain some of the challenges which were experienced and reported to your organisation in attending vaccination centres?
So I think I've put a particular case in my witness statement around Dr. Rupi Kaur, who is someone with 24 hours support and has cerebral palsy and is an electric wheelchair user, was, when looking for vaccination for herself and her carers, was sent to a football stadium in Manchester, the Etihad Stadium, and on arrival her carers found that there was no access for wheelchair users. And yet when looking at the website, that wasn't clearly evident. So that information just isn't front and centre about, when you're picking what your access requirements are, the system should be designed to then identify the centres that actually have that accessibility for you, so you're not sent trying to find the right place to go to. And then when trying to kind of tackle that through 111 and the GP, was kind of then accused that you're trying to jump the system, the queue, to try and get priority elsewhere. So kind of accessibility starts at the point of being informed on the web, booking, and having alternative methods. But then when you get there, the location of centres, and then the whole kind of accessibility route of arrival, how near it is to you, if you can drive there, is there parking for wheelchair users or blue badge holders, are there drop-off points? Are you waiting outside in the rain as a wheelchair user? When I went to get my vaccination, I live in North London, but for some reason I was sent to St Thomas's in central London. Now, I'm fortunate I drive, so I drove there on that occasion, but found it difficult to park anywhere. And then I had to wait outside in a huge queue in the rain, in the cold. And so all of these things are just not taken into account. And I think just what I would like to say, what's frustrating for our organisations, is we tell the government this all the time. This is not something new. Disabled people have always been around, and we've been engaging with governments for years, saying the same things over and over again.
Thank you for sharing those experiences. I just want to touch briefly on the point of monitoring and uptake. Is it right that you have concerns about the sufficiency of the type of data captured about disabled people and the ability of such data to reflect any disparities in vaccine uptake? And you point in your statement to the fact that the UK government at times relied on ONS data, which wasn't up to date. It didn't separate types of disability, for example. Would you consider it also one of the key things to come out of your statement that governments need to have data which distinguishes between types of disability, which is up to date, captured in as real time as possible in an emergency scenario, so that groups that might have lower uptake can be accurately tracked and action can be taken to help them?
Yeah, I would absolutely say that. And it's been systemically an issue that we don't collect that level of data in that way, and relying on 2011 census data that didn't disaggregate the data in that way based on impairments and disability. So you can't monitor, and if you can't monitor it, you can't then take action on the areas that you need to be doing.
And finally then, the subject of therapeutics and the steps taken to enable their use, including of prophylactics and new drugs amongst disabled people. What were your concerns, please, about that?
So I think looking at it, the priority was solely based on the vaccine programme. Huge amount of investment went into that, and not looking at other therapeutics, and particularly when we've got in our nation 1.2 million immunocompromised individuals for whom the vaccine was not a possibility, and they were not able to take that. But that when there was evidence of other therapeutics available that were available in other countries and were showing good rates of success, that we we didn't have access to those. And I think our question was really is why were they not prioritised? Was it because there was other evidence that the government had access to about them not being effective, or was it purely a financial decision?
Would it be right to characterise the DPO's view on the cancellation of the Evusheld contract as one of particular disappointment for you?
Yes, again, because of the success rates that it was showing in other places. Absolutely. And the impact is that those individuals who can't have the vaccine have to continue shielding. While the rest of the country got out and went back to a level of normality, those individuals' lives couldn't change. They had to continue to isolate, but without any of the support systems that may have been available to them during the height of the pandemic.
Ms Malik, thank you very much. Those are all of my questions for you. My lady, do you have any questions?
Thank you very much, Ms Malik. I find it astonishing that government could ignore an advocate as eloquent as you are. I think I might have described your advocacy as eloquent last time you helped me. You've now helped me twice. I've got a feeling you're going to be helping me again in the future. So thank you very much indeed. You made some very important points and I'm really grateful to you.
Thank you.
Right, we shall finish now and start again at 10 o'clock tomorrow.
All rise.